The wagon wheel had crushed her leg beneath its iron rim on a dusty September afternoon in 1877, and though the bone had healed crooked under Doc Patterson's careful ministrations, Clara Whitmore's limp remained as permanent as the Montana Territory's sprawling mountains. She stood now at the edge of the community hall in Silver Creek, watching the other young women glide across the wooden floor in their Sunday best, their skirts swirling like colorful clouds while the fiddle sang and the piano jangled out melodies that made her heart ache with longing. The autumn harvest dance was the social event of the season, drawing ranchers and townsfolk from 20 miles around, and Clara had nearly stayed home until her younger sister Molly had practically dragged her into the wagon, insisting that hiding away would only make the loneliness worse. "Look at her standing there like a broken fence post," came a voice from behind Clara, sharp enough to cut through the music. She recognized it immediately as belonging to Patricia Hendricks, the banker's daughter who had made Clara's life miserable since they were children attending the one-room schoolhouse together. "Honestly, I don't know why she even bothers coming to these things. No man wants a wife who cannot even walk properly, let alone help with the ranch work." The laughter that followed felt like hot coals pressed against Clara's skin. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to give Patricia the satisfaction of seeing her pain, though her hands trembled as they clutched the punch cup she held. 3 other women joined in the cruel mirth, their voices blending into a chorus of mockery that seemed to echo off the raftered ceiling. Clara's limp had become the source of endless commentary since the accident 2 years prior, when the supply wagon she had been driving hit a rut and overturned, pinning her beneath it for nearly an hour before help arrived. The physical pain of that day had been excruciating, but it paled in comparison to the social death sentence it had delivered. "She walks like a 3-legged mule," another voice chimed in, followed by more laughter. Clara blinked rapidly, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. She set her punch cup down on the nearest table with hands that shook despite her best efforts to steady them, and she began making her way toward the door, each uneven step feeling like a mile under the weight of those cruel stares. The night air would be cool and welcoming, free from judgment and ridicule. She could sit in the wagon until Molly was ready to leave, and no one would have to look at her and be reminded that not everyone was born perfect or stayed that way. She had made it halfway across the room when a deep voice cut through the music and chatter like a knife through butter. "Excuse me, miss." Clara turned, nearly losing her balance in her surprise, and found herself looking up into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. The man standing before her was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days working outdoors and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his worn Stetson hat. He wore clean denim pants, a pressed white shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better days but was well maintained. A silver belt buckle caught the lamplight, and his boots, though dusty, had been recently polished. He could not have been more than 25 years old, and there was something in his steady gaze that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. "I am sorry," Clara stammered, stepping aside awkwardly. "Am I blocking your way?" "Not at all," the cowboy said, and a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his serious features into something warm and approachable. "I was hoping you might do me the honor of dancing with me, that is, if you're not already spoken for this evening." Clara stared at him, certain she had misheard. Behind her she could hear the whispers starting up again, could feel Patricia's eyes boring into her back like hot pokers. "You want to dance with me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I would not have asked otherwise," he replied simply, extending his hand toward her with the kind of confidence that came from a man who knew exactly what he wanted and did not care what others thought about it. "Name is James Cordell. I work at the Triple Bar Ranch about 10 miles north of town. Just started there 3 weeks ago, came up from Wyoming to help with the cattle drive preparations." "I have a limp," Clara blurted out, the words tumbling from her mouth before she could stop them. "I cannot dance properly. I will just embarrass you in front of everyone." James's expression did not change, did not register the pity or disgust she had come to expect whenever she mentioned her injury. Instead, he simply stepped closer and kept his hand extended. "Then I will hold you steady," he said quietly. His voice meant only for her ears. "I have danced with women who had 2 good legs and could not keep time to save their lives. I suspect you will do just fine." The music had shifted to a slower waltz, the kind where partners held each other close and moved in gentle circles around the floor. Clara looked at James's outstretched hand, then back at his face, searching for any sign of mockery or cruel jest. She found none. What she saw instead was genuine interest, a warmth in those blue eyes that made something inside her chest flutter like a caged bird suddenly finding the door to its prison standing open. "My name is Clara Whitmore," she said softly, placing her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, the hand of a man who earned his living through hard work and was not afraid of it. James led her onto the dance floor with a gentleness that surprised her, positioning them near the center where the light from the oil lamps created a warm golden glow. He placed one hand at her waist, holding her other hand in his, and began to move, his steps slow and measured. When Clara stumbled slightly, her weak leg threatening to give way, James simply tightened his hold on her waist, supporting her weight so smoothly that to any observer it would have looked like part of the dance itself. "I have got you," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Just follow my lead and do not worry about anything else." Clara tried to relax into his embrace, though her entire body felt tense with awareness of all the eyes watching them. She could see Patricia standing at the edge of the dance floor, her mouth hanging open in shock. She could see other townspeople whispering behind their hands, their expressions ranging from surprise to disapproval to curious interest. But when she looked up at James, she found his attention focused entirely on her, as if they were the only 2 people in the entire territory. "Why did you ask me to dance?" Clara asked as they moved together, her steps growing more confident with each turn. "You could have had your pick of any woman here tonight. Patricia Hendricks has been batting her eyelashes at every eligible man who has walked through that door." James made a sound that might have been a laugh or a snort of derision. "I am not interested in women who spend their time tearing others down to make themselves feel bigger," he said bluntly. "I watched you standing there, and I saw how you held your head high even when those harpies were mocking you. Takes real strength to do that, the kind of strength that matters more than whether someone walks with a limp or not." The sincerity in his voice made Clara's throat tighten with emotion. For 2 years she had endured pitying looks and cruel comments, had watched potential suitors turn away the moment they noticed her uneven gait. She had begun to believe that she was damaged goods, that no man would ever want her as a wife because she could not perform all the physical tasks expected of a frontier woman. Yet here was James Cordell, holding her as if she were made of something precious, looking at her as if he actually saw her rather than just her injury. "I was not always like this," Clara found herself saying, the words spilling out in a rush. "Before the accident, I could dance all night. I helped my father run our ranch after my mother passed. I could ride, rope cattle, mend fences. Now I am lucky if I can walk across town without needing to rest." "What happened?" James asked, guiding her through a turn that should have been difficult, but felt effortless with his support. Clara told him about the accident, about how she had been driving the supply wagon back from town when one of the horses spooked at a rattlesnake. The wagon had overturned, pinning her leg beneath the wheel. Her father and the ranch hands had found her eventually, but the damage had been done. Doc Patterson had set the bone as best he could, but it had healed at a slight angle, leaving her with a permanent limp and chronic pain that flared up whenever she overdid things. "My father sold the ranch 6 months ago," Clara continued, surprised at how easy it was to talk to James, how natural it felt to share things she normally kept locked tight inside her chest. "He said it was because he wanted to retire, but I know the truth. He sold it because he knew I could not help him run it anymore, and he did not have sons to take over. We live in town now. He does carpentry work, and I help Molly with her dressmaking business." The song ended, but James did not release her. Instead, he guided her into the next dance, a slightly faster tempo that should have been impossible for Clara but somehow was not because James adjusted his steps to match hers, supporting her when she needed it and giving her space when she did not. They danced through 3 more songs, and with each one, Clara felt herself relaxing more, smiling more, forgetting about the people watching, and just enjoying the sensation of being held and wanted. When the music finally paused to give the musicians a rest, James led Clara off the dance floor and toward the refreshment table. He fetched her a cup of punch and one for himself, and they stood together near the open windows where the cool night breeze could reach them. "Thank you," Clara said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "That was the first time I've danced since the accident. I had forgotten how much I loved it." "Then we will have to do it again," James replied, and there was a promise in his voice that made Clara's heart skip a beat. "In fact, I was hoping you might allow me to call on you properly, if that would be acceptable to you and your father, of course." Clara nearly dropped her punch cup. "You want to court me?" she asked incredulously. "I want to get to know you better," James said. "From what I have seen tonight, you are exactly the kind of woman I have been hoping to find. Strong, resilient, and not afraid to show up even when life has dealt you a hard hand. That tells me more about your character than a dozen dances with some simpering fool who has never faced a day of hardship in her life." Before Clara could respond, Patricia Hendricks appeared at James's elbow, her face flushed and her smile overly bright. "Mr. Cordell, I do not believe we have been properly introduced," she purred, completely ignoring Clara as if she were invisible. "I am Patricia Hendricks. My father owns the Silver Creek Bank and Trust. Perhaps you would like to dance with me. I promise I can keep up better than some others." The insult was thinly veiled, and Clara felt her cheeks burning with humiliation. She started to step back, to give James an easy exit from what had surely been a momentary lapse in judgment on his part, but his hand shot out and caught her wrist gently but firmly. "I appreciate the offer, Miss Hendricks," James said, his voice polite but cool, "but I'm not available for dancing this evening. I intend to spend the rest of the night getting to know Miss Whitmore better, if she will have me." Patricia's face went through several shades of red before settling on an ugly purple. "You would rather spend time with a cripple than with me?" she hissed, her composure shattering like thin ice. The words hung in the air like poison. Clara felt tears pricking at her eyes again, but before she could pull away, James stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Clara and Patricia. "Miss Whitmore is worth 10 of you, and that is being generous," James said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge of steel that made Patricia take an involuntary step backward. "I suggest you go find someone else to inflict your company on, because I have no interest in women who get their pleasure from cruelty." Patricia opened and closed her mouth several times, looking like a fish gasping for air, before turning on her heel and storming away, her skirts swishing angrily. Several people had overheard the exchange, and Clara could see the mixture of shock and approval on their faces. No one ever stood up to Patricia Hendricks, whose father's money gave her a sense of untouchability in Silver Creek's small social hierarchy. "You did not have to do that," Clara whispered, though gratitude flooded through her in warm waves. "She will make your life difficult now. Her father has influence in this town." "Her father's money does not mean much to me," James replied, turning back to face Clara with that same steady gaze that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. "I work for my living and answer to my own conscience. Now, would you like to take a walk with me? I think we could both use some fresh air, and I would like to continue our conversation somewhere quieter." Clara nodded, her heart pounding so hard she was certain James must be able to hear it. They made their way outside, where the Montana night had turned cool and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds spilled on black velvet. The sounds of the dance continued inside the community hall, but out here there was space to breathe, to think, to simply exist without judgment. They walked slowly along the wooden sidewalk, James matching his pace to Clara's without making it obvious or pitying. He talked about his life, about growing up on a small ranch in Wyoming that his family had lost during the harsh winter of 1873 when the cattle had frozen and the bank had foreclosed. He had spent the years since working on various ranches throughout the territory, learning everything he could about cattle ranching and saving his money with the dream of one day owning his own spread. "I have almost enough saved now," James said as they paused near the livery stable where the smell of hay and horses filled the air. "Another 2 years, maybe 3, and I should be able to make a down payment on some land. Not much at first, maybe 160 acres, but it would be mine. I could build it up from there, start my own herd." "That sounds like a good dream," Clara said softly, imagining what it would be like to have such a clear vision of the future, such determination to achieve it. Her own dreams had died in the accident, or so she had thought until tonight. "It is a lonely dream, though," James admitted, turning to face her. The moonlight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the gentle curve of his mouth. "A ranch needs more than one person to make it work. It needs a partner, someone who understands the land and the life and is not afraid of hard work." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "James, I cannot do the kind of work a ranch wife needs to do," she said, forcing herself to be honest even though it hurt. "I can barely walk across town without pain. I cannot ride anymore, not really. I would be more burden than help." James reached out and took both of her hands in his touch warm and solid and real. "Clara, there is more to running a ranch than physical labor. There is keeping the books, planning the breeding programs, managing supplies and sales. There is cooking and preserving food, tending a garden, making the house a home. And most importantly, there is having someone by your side who you can talk to at the end of a long day. Someone who makes you want to work hard because you are building something together. That is what I am looking for, not just a pair of hands to help with chores." "You barely know me," Clara protested weakly, though her heart was singing with hope she had thought long dead. "Then let me know you better," James said simply. "Let me court you properly, Clara Whitmore. Let me prove to you that I see you for who you are, not what you cannot do. And if, after a few months, you decide I am not the man for you, then I will accept that. But I think we could have something special here if you are willing to take a chance." Clara looked up into his earnest face, saw the sincerity shining in his eyes, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, you may court me." The smile that broke across James's face was like sunrise after a long night. He squeezed her hands gently, then released one to offer her his arm. "Then let me walk you home properly," he said. "And tomorrow, if you are willing, I would like to call on you and meet your father. I want to do this right, Clara. You deserve that." They found Molly inside the dance hall, her eyes going wide when she saw Clara's flushed cheeks and bright smile. After quick introductions, Molly agreed to let James escort them home in his wagon, which he had left at the livery. The ride back to the Whitmore house on the edge of town was filled with easy conversation, and when James helped Clara down from the wagon seat, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Until tomorrow," he said softly, and Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump of emotion in her throat. Inside the small house her father had purchased with the proceeds from the ranch sale, Clara leaned against the door and released a long breath. Molly appeared immediately, her face alight with curiosity. "Tell me everything," Molly demanded, pulling Clara into the parlor where the fire still burned low in the grate. "Who is he? Where did he come from? And why did Patricia Hendricks look like she wanted to murder someone when we left?" Clara told her sister everything, from James's unexpected invitation to dance to their walk and his request to court her. Molly listened with growing excitement, occasionally interrupting with squeals of delight or questions for clarification. Their father, who had been reading in his chair, set aside his newspaper and listened with a more measured expression. "This young man wants to call on you tomorrow?" Harold Whitmore asked, his weathered face serious. He was a man in his middle 50s with gray threading through his brown hair and the permanent squint of someone who had spent most of his life outdoors. "What do you know about him, Clara?" "Not much yet," Clara admitted. "But Father, he treated me like I was worth something. He did not care about my leg, And when Patricia tried to humiliate me, he defended me. I know it is fast, but I would like the chance to know him better." Harold studied his daughter for a long moment, and Clara could see the conflict in his eyes. He had blamed himself for the accident even though it had not been his fault, and she knew he worried constantly about her future. The sale of the ranch had been as much about trying to give his daughters a chance at town life, where Clara's injury might matter less, as it had been about his own inability to manage the land without her help. "If he comes tomorrow, I will speak with him," Harold finally said, "and we will see what kind of man he is, but Clara, be careful with your heart. I do not want to see you hurt again." "I will be careful," Clara promised, though she suspected it was already too late for that warning. James Cordell had awakened something in her that she had thought dead and buried, a hope for a future that extended beyond the narrow confines of her injury and the limitations it imposed. James arrived the next afternoon precisely at 2 o'clock, driving the same wagon but dressed in his cleanest clothes. He brought flowers for Clara and Molly, which immediately won Molly over completely, and he sat down with Harold in the parlor for a conversation that lasted nearly an hour. Clara and Molly waited in the kitchen, pretending to work on sewing projects while straining to hear what was being said. When Harold finally called Clara into the parlor, his expression was unreadable. James stood when she entered, his hat in his hands, looking slightly nervous for the first time since she had met him. "Mr. Cordell has asked permission to court you," Harold said slowly. "He has been honest with me about his circumstances and his intentions. He knows you were injured and that you have limitations because of it, and he has assured me that he does not care about that. He has also told me about his plans for the future and how he hopes you might figure into them, should you both decide you suit each other." Clara looked between her father and James, her heart hammering. "And what did you say?" she asked. "I told him he has my permission, with the understanding that you are my daughter, and I will not see you treated poorly or taken advantage of," Harold replied. "He may call on you 3 times a week, always here at the house, or in public places where you will be properly chaperoned. After 3 months, we will reassess the situation. Does that seem acceptable to you, Clara?" "Yes," Clara said immediately, relief and joy flooding through her. "Yes, that is more than acceptable." Over the following weeks, James became a regular presence in Clara's life. He came to dinner twice a week, always bringing something to contribute to the meal, and on Sundays after church, he would take Clara for walks around town or sit with her in the parlor while Molly played chaperone, usually while working on her sewing and pretending not to listen to their conversations. James told Clara about his work at the Triple Bar Ranch, about the cattle and horses he worked with, about the other ranch hands and the foreman who was teaching him the finer points of running a successful operation. Clara, in turn, shared her own stories about growing up on her family's ranch, about the mother she had lost to influenza when she was only 12, about how she had learned to manage the books and help her father with the business side of ranching because he was better with his hands than with numbers. She told James about the dreams she had once harbored of expanding her father's small operation, of maybe breeding horses in addition to cattle, dreams that had seemed to die along with the use of her leg. "Those dreams do not have to be dead," James said one evening as they sat together on the porch swing at the Whitmore house, the October air crisp with the promise of coming winter. "What if we pursued them together? I know cattle, but I've always been interested in horses. With your knowledge of the business side and my ability to do the physical work, we could make something really successful." "You are talking about a future that has not happened yet," Clara said softly, though her heart leaped at the possibility. "We have only been courting for 6 weeks." "I know," James replied, turning to face her. "But Clara, I knew the first night I danced with you that you were special. I have spent every moment since then falling more in love with you. I know it is fast, and I know we are supposed to wait the full 3 months your father requested, but I already know what my heart wants. I want you to be my wife. I want us to build that ranch together, to create the life we both dreamed about. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to hold you steady through whatever storms life brings us, just like I did on that dance floor." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and freeing to say out loud. I have been so afraid to hope, to believe that someone could want me as I am now, but you make me believe anything is possible. James cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her, a soft, sweet press of lips that promised everything words could not convey. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, James rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this properly, he said. I will wait until the 3 months are up, and then I will ask your father for permission to marry you. But I wanted you to know my intentions, Clara. I wanted you to know that this is not just some passing fancy for me. You are my future. The remaining weeks of their courtship passed in a blur of happiness. James continued to call on Clara regularly, and as word spread through Silver Creek about their relationship, Clara noticed a shift in how people treated her. Some, like Patricia Hendricks and her circle, remained cold and disapproving, but others seemed to see her differently now. If a man like James Cordell, who was known to be a hard worker and decent fellow, saw value in Clara Whitmore, then perhaps she had been underestimated. The weather turned colder as November arrived, bringing the first snow to the Montana mountains that surrounded Silver Creek. James had been putting in extra hours at the Triple Bar Ranch, helping to bring the cattle down from the high country before the winter storms made passage impossible. He arrived at the Whitmore house one Sunday afternoon with news that made his eyes shine with excitement. The owner of the Triple Bar is selling off a portion of his land, James announced as soon as he was inside, barely pausing to remove his coat. 200 acres on the eastern border of his property near White Pine Creek. It has good water, decent grazing, and enough timber to build a house and barn. Harold, I know I said I needed another 2 years to save enough, but if I put down everything I have now, I can make the down payment. The owner has agreed to carry a note for the rest, to be paid over 5 years. Harold looked up from the saddle he was mending, his expression thoughtful. That is a big risk, son, he said slowly, and Clara's heart swelled at the casual use of that word. If you have a bad year or two, you could lose everything. I know, James agreed, coming to sit at the table where Harold worked. But opportunities like this do not come along often. The land is selling for a fair price because the owner wants someone he knows will work hard and succeed. He has seen me work all fall and says he trusts me to make a go of it. What are you asking, Mr. Cordell? Harold asked, though Clara suspected he already knew. James took a deep breath, then turned to look at Clara, who stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the parlor, her hands twisted in her apron. I am asking permission to marry your daughter, sir. I know the 3 months are not quite up, but with this opportunity, I am ready to start building our future now. I have enough saved not just for the down payment, but also for materials to build a small house, something Clara and I can start our life in while I grow the ranch. I can support a wife, Harold, not in luxury, but comfortably, and with the promise of better things to come. And I swear to you that I will spend every day of my life making Clara happy and keeping her safe. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Clara held her breath, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She saw her father look at her, saw the question in his eyes, and she nodded once firmly, leaving no doubt about what she wanted. You have my blessing, Harold said finally, setting down his tools. But James, I need to know that you understand what you are taking on. Clara has good days and bad days. There will be times when the pain in her leg makes it hard for her to do even simple tasks. There will be limitations on what she can physically manage. Are you truly prepared for that? Sir, I am not marrying Clara's leg, James said simply. I am marrying the woman who has more courage and strength than anyone I have ever met. The woman who makes me laugh and challenges me to be better. The woman who understands ranching and shares my dreams. Whatever limitations she has, we will work around them together. That is what marriage is supposed to be, is it not? Two people facing life as a team. Harold's stern expression cracked into a smile. Yes, he said quietly. That is exactly what it is supposed to be. Then you have my blessing and my congratulations. Take care of my girl, James. James crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled Clara into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around despite her startled laugh. We are getting married, he said, his voice full of wonder. "Clara Whitmore, you are going to be my wife." "Yes," Clara laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I am." The wedding took place 3 weeks later on a cold December morning in the Silver Creek Church. It was a simple affair with only the family and close friends in attendance. But to Clara, it was perfect. She wore a dress that Molly had made specially for the occasion, cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. James wore a new suit that he had purchased in town, looking so handsome that Clara's breath had caught when she first saw him standing at the altar. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony, his voice strong and sure as he spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the commitment Clara and James were making to each other. When it came time for the vows, James held both of Clara's hands in his and spoke his promises in a voice that carried to every corner of the church, never once taking his eyes from her face. "I, James Cordell, take you, Clara Whitmore, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to hold you steady when life tries to knock you down, to be your partner in all things, and to build a life with you that makes us both proud. In sickness and health, in plenty and in want, I will be yours now and forever." Clara repeated her own vows, her voice trembling with emotion, but never faltering. And when Reverend Thompson finally pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the congregation wiped away tears. The small reception that followed was held at the Whitmore house, where Molly and Harold had prepared a feast that seemed far too elaborate for the number of people present, but no one complained about the abundance. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, James helped Clara into the wagon he had driven into town that morning. Behind the seat, all of Clara's belongings were packed in trunks and boxes, everything she owned in the world ready to be transported to her new home. The house James had built on their land was small, just 3 rooms, but he had worked on it every spare moment over the past weeks, determined to have it ready for his bride. The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours, the wagon creaking along the rutted road while snow fell gently from the dark sky. James had wrapped Clara in several blankets and heated bricks to keep her feet warm, and she nestled against his side as he drove, feeling safe and cherished and happier than she had thought possible just a few short months ago. When they finally arrived at the property, James lit a lantern and helped Clara down from the wagon. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cordell," he said softly, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the sound of her new name. The house was indeed small, but it was solid and well built, with a main room that served as kitchen and parlor combined, a separate bedroom, and a small loft that could be used for storage or eventually for children. James had installed a good stove, and he had it burning hot against the winter cold. The furniture was simple, mostly built by his own hands, but there were thoughtful touches everywhere. Curtains that he had purchased in town hung at the windows. A rocking chair sat near the fireplace, and on the table there was a vase with dried wildflowers clearly placed there before he had left for town that morning. "It is not much yet," James said, sounding almost nervous, "but I promise you, Clara, I will make this into a real home for us. In the spring I will add on another room, maybe 2. I will build you a proper kitchen and a front porch where you can sit and look out over the land. I will make this place worthy of you." Clara turned to face her husband, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "James Cordell, you have already given me more than I ever dreamed of having. This house, this land, this life we are starting together, it is everything I wanted and was afraid to hope for. I do not need it to be bigger or fancier. I just need you." James kissed her then deeply and thoroughly, and Clara felt the last of her fears and doubts melt away. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever difficulties her injury might cause, they would face them together. She was no longer alone, no longer defined solely by what she could not do. She was Clara Cordell now, wife of a good man and partner in building a dream. That first winter was hard in ways that neither of them had fully anticipated. The cold made Clara's leg ache constantly, and there were days when she could barely put weight on it. James took over more of the household tasks on those days, cooking their meals and keeping the house warm without complaint or resentment. He built a special stool for Clara to use in the kitchen so she could sit while she worked, and he made sure she always had enough firewood within easy reach so she would not have to walk far to tend the stove. The ranch work was demanding, even with the relatively small herd of 30 cattle that James had purchased with the last of his savings. He was up before dawn every morning, tending to the animals, breaking ice on the creek so they could drink, and hauling hay from the small barn he had built. Some evenings he came home so exhausted he could barely eat before falling into bed, but he always made time to ask Clara about her day, to hold her close and remind her that they were in this together. Clara, for her part, threw herself into the work she could do. She managed the household accounts, carefully tracking every penny they spent and earned. She made their clothes last longer by constantly mending and patching, and she learned to cook hearty meals that would stick to James's ribs and keep him warm during long days outside. She also began planning for the spring, mapping out where they should plant a garden, and researching which vegetables would grow best in the Montana climate. On the long winter evenings, they sat together by the fire, and James taught Clara to play poker with a deck of cards he had owned since his cowboy days. Clara taught James to read better, something he had never had much opportunity to learn as a child. They talked about their plans for the ranch, about the horses they wanted to breed someday, about the children they hoped to have filling the house with noise and laughter. "I want at least 3, James said one night, his hand resting on Clara's stomach in a gesture that had become habitual. "Maybe 4 if we are blessed. I want them to grow up knowing what it means to work hard and love deeply." "And if they inherit my bad leg?" Clara asked quietly, voicing a fear she had carried silently since they married. "What if I pass this on to our children?" James was quiet for a moment, his hand still warm against her. "Then we will teach them the same lesson you already know," he finally said, "that a person's worth is not determined by whether their body is perfect, that limitations can be overcome or worked around, that courage and character matter more than anything else. Clara, any child of ours will be loved and cherished no matter what. How could they not be? With you as their mother." Winter finally gave way to spring, and with the thaw came new life and new possibilities. Clara discovered she was pregnant in early April, and James's joy was so profound, he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests that he would hurt himself. He immediately began making plans to add that extra room to the house, wanting to have a proper nursery ready before the baby arrived in late autumn. The spring and summer were busy months. James worked from dawn to dusk, expanding the house, tending the growing cattle herd, and breaking ground for the large garden Clara had planned. Clara, despite the tiredness and occasional sickness that came with pregnancy, threw herself into making their house a true home. She planted the garden, carefully managing the watering and weeding despite the difficulty of kneeling and standing with her injured leg. She sewed baby clothes from fabric that Molly sent out from town. And she continued to manage the ranch accounts, proving to have a head for business that impressed even Harold when he came to visit. In July, James made a decision that would change the trajectory of their ranch. He used a small portion of their carefully hoarded savings to purchase 2 young mares, both with excellent bloodlines, from a breeder who was selling off stock before moving to California. "This is the start of our horse breeding program at the Ruhr," he told Clara excitedly. "In a few years, when these girls are old enough, we will breed them to the best stallions we can find. We will build a reputation for quality horses, Clara. I can feel it." Clara's father came to visit regularly, often bringing Molly with him. On one of these visits in August, Harold pulled James aside for a private conversation while the women worked in the garden. "I wanted to tell you that you have exceeded every expectation I had," Harold said gruffly, clearly uncomfortable with emotional displays. "My daughter is happy, truly happy, for the first time since the accident. You have given her purpose and love, and you have built something good here. I am proud to call you my son." James shook Harold's hand, his own throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, sir. Clara is the best thing that ever happened to me. I wake up every day grateful that she took a chance on me." As Clara's pregnancy progressed, James became increasingly protective. He insisted she rest more, take on fewer physical tasks, and let him handle anything that required too much walking or standing. Clara chafed at the restrictions at first, her independent nature rebelling against being coddled, but she gradually came to appreciate his concern for what it was, an expression of love and care rather than doubt in her capabilities. The baby arrived on a cold November evening, almost exactly 1 year after Clara and James had married. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when James, pacing frantically outside the bedroom where Molly and a midwife from town attended to Clara, genuinely feared he might lose the woman he loved. But Clara was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and just before midnight the sound of a baby's cry filled the small house. "You have a son," Molly announced, opening the bedroom door with a tired but radiant smile. "A big, healthy boy who clearly has his father's lungs." James rushed into the room to find Clara propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing with joy, holding a red-faced infant wrapped in blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and even in his newborn state, a look of determination that made James laugh through his tears. "He is perfect," James whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and reaching out to touch his son's tiny hand. "Clara, you are amazing. Look at what we made together." They named him Thomas, after James's father who had died when James was young, and from the moment he entered the world, Thomas Cordell made his presence known. He was a loud, demanding baby who wanted to be fed constantly and seemed to sleep only in short bursts. Clara, exhausted from childbirth and struggling to manage an infant while her leg continued to give her trouble, often found herself in tears from frustration and fatigue. James took on even more of the household duties, getting up with the baby at night so Clara could rest, cooking meals when she was too tired to stand at the stove, and never once complaining about the added workload. He hired a young woman from town to come help a few days a week, giving Clara breaks to recover and regain her strength. "I do not know how I would do this without you," Clara told James one evening as they sat together watching Thomas sleep in his cradle. "I feel like I am failing at being a mother. I cannot chase after him once he starts walking. I cannot carry him for long periods because my leg cannot handle the weight. What kind of mother cannot even properly care for her own child?" "You are exactly the kind of mother Thomas needs, Onspinor," James said firmly, pulling Clara close. "You are loving and patient and determined. Yes, there will be things you cannot do, but Clara, there are things I cannot do too. I cannot nurse him. I cannot soothe him the way you do with just your voice and your touch. We are a team, remember? We each do what we can, and together we give him everything he needs." As Thomas grew from infant to baby to toddler, the truth of James's words became apparent. Clara might not be able to chase Thomas around the yard when he learned to walk, but she taught him his letters and numbers. She read to him for hours, instilling a love of stories and learning. She taught him to be gentle with animals and respectful of the land. And she showed him, simply by existing and refusing to let her limitations define her, that people could overcome adversity and still lead full, meaningful lives. The ranch prospered over the next few years. James's instinct about horse breeding proved correct, and the foals produced by their mares attracted attention from buyers throughout the territory. The cattle herd grew steadily, and James's reputation as a fair dealer and knowledgeable rancher spread. They were able to pay off a significant portion of the land debt ahead of schedule, and James continued to add improvements to the property with a barn expansion, better fencing, and additional rooms on the house. When Thomas was 3 years old, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. And in the spring of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Clara's mother. Sarah was a calmer baby than Thomas had been, content to observe the world with wide, curious eyes, and she seemed to instinctively understand that her mother could not always pick her up immediately when she cried. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the horses and cattle. Sarah proved to have her mother's head for numbers even at a young age. And Clara, despite the chronic pain that would never fully leave her, found a deep sense of contentment in the life she and James had built together. One evening in the summer of 1885, 8 years after the harvest dance where they had met, James and Clara sat together on the porch he had finally built, watching the sun set over the mountains that surrounded their land. Thomas, now 7, was in the barn tending to his own horse, a gentle gelding that James had given him for his birthday. Sarah, just turned 3, was asleep inside the house, worn out from a day of playing in the garden. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked softly, a question she had never quite dared to voice before. "Taking on a wife with a limp, all the extra work and accommodations you have had to make over the years?" James turned to look at her, his blue eyes still as clear and steady as they had been that night at the dance. He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Clara, you are asking me if I regret having the best life I could have imagined," he said quietly. "You are asking if I regret falling in love with the strongest, smartest, most resilient woman I have ever met. You are asking if I regret building a successful ranch and raising beautiful children, and waking up every morning next to someone who makes me want to be a better man. The answer is no. Not for a single moment, not on the hardest days, have I ever regretted asking you to dance that night." "I was so afraid," Clara admitted, tears sliding down her cheeks. "When those women laughed at me, I wanted to disappear. I had convinced myself that I was worthless, that no one would ever want me. And then you appeared, like something out of a dream, and you held me steady. You have been holding me steady ever since." "And you have been doing the same for me," James replied, pulling her close. "You think you were the only one who needed saving that night?" I was drifting. Clara, working from ranch to ranch with no real purpose beyond saving money. You gave me something to work for, someone to build a life with. We saved each other. They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first walk together all those years ago. The sounds of their ranch surrounded them with the gentle lowing of cattle, the soft nicker of horses in the barn, and the whisper of wind through the pine trees that dotted their property. Inside the house, Sarah began to cry, and Clara started to rise. But James gently pressed her back into her chair. "I will get her," he said, dropping a kiss on the top of Clara's head. "You rest for a moment." Clara watched him go. This man who had changed her entire life with a simple invitation to dance, and she felt a wave of gratitude so profound it took her breath away. The accident that had given her a permanent limp had also, in a strange way, led her to this life. If she had not been standing at the edge of that dance floor, if those women had not been cruel, if James had not seen her and decided to act, none of this would exist. She thought about the girl she had been, broken and ashamed, convinced that her value as a person had been destroyed along with the proper function of her leg. She thought about all the moments of doubt and fear, all the times she had wondered if she was enough. And then she looked at the life she had now with a thriving ranch, healthy children, a husband who loved her unconditionally, and a future full of promise and hope. The pain in her leg would never fully go away. There would always be limitations on what she could physically do, but she had learned that those limitations did not define her, did not diminish her worth or her ability to live a full, meaningful life. She had learned that love, real love, saw past imperfections to the person beneath. And she had learned that sometimes the worst moments of our lives could lead us, in unexpected ways, to the best ones. James returned to the porch with Sarah in his arms, the little girl's head resting sleepily on his shoulder. Thomas emerged from the barn and came running up to the porch full of news about the foal that had been born earlier that week and how it was already trying to run on its wobbly legs. "Can we go see the foal tomorrow, Mama?" Thomas asked excitedly. "Papa says we need to start getting it used to people, and I want to help." "Of course we can," Clara replied, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. "Right after breakfast, we will all go to the barn together." As the family settled in for the evening, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. This was her life now, messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. She was a wife, a mother, a partner in a successful ranch. She was a woman who had overcome tremendous adversity and found happiness on the other side. And she was loved deeply and truly by a man who had seen her worth when she had been unable to see it herself. Years continued to pass, each bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when the snow piled high and money was tight. There were seasons of plenty when the cattle and horses sold for good prices and they could afford small luxuries. Thomas grew into a capable young man who shared his father's gift with animals and his mother's business sense. Sarah developed a love of books and learning that rivaled Clara's own, and she often talked about becoming a teacher someday. In 1890, when Clara was 35 and James was 38, they welcomed their third and final child, a son they named Daniel. His arrival was a surprise, as they had thought their family was complete, but he was no less loved for being unexpected. Daniel proved to be the most adventurous of their children, constantly getting into mischief and keeping his parents on their toes. The ranch had grown significantly by then, expanding to over 400 acres through careful purchases of adjoining land. Their horse breeding program had become renowned throughout Montana, and buyers came from as far away as Wyoming and Idaho to purchase their stock. The cattle herd numbered in the hundreds, and James had hired several ranch hands to help with the work. Clara had become something of a local legend, known not just as James Cordell's wife, but as a shrewd businesswoman in her own right. She managed all the financial aspects of the ranch, negotiated sales, and had even begun advising other ranch wives on how to keep proper books. Her limp remained more pronounced on cold days or when she overdid things, but it had become simply a part of who she was rather than a defining characteristic. On a warm September evening in 1895, the Cordell family gathered at their ranch to celebrate Thomas's 18th birthday. Harold Whitmore, now in his 70s and moving slowly but still sharp of mind, had come from town along with Molly, who had never married, but had built a successful dressmaking business that served clients throughout the territory. Friends and neighbors from surrounding ranches filled the expanded house and spilled out into the yard, where tables had been set up for the feast Clara and Sarah had spent days preparing. As the sun began to set and the party continued with music and laughter, James found Clara standing slightly apart from the crowd, looking out over the land they had built together. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About that harvest dance 18 years ago," Clara replied, leaning back against him. "About how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over, and about how a cowboy I had never met asked me to dance and changed everything." "Best decision I ever made," James murmured, pressing a kiss to her neck. "Dancing with you that night." "The second best," Clara corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "The best decision was choosing to keep dancing with me every day since." They stood together as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story nearly 2 decades earlier. Around them, their children laughed and played, their friends celebrated, and the ranch they had built together thrived under the vast Montana sky. Clara's legs still ached, especially after long days on her feet. She still walked with a pronounced limp that would never go away. But when she looked at James, when she looked at their children and their home and the life they had created, she felt nothing but gratitude. The accident that had crushed her leg had not crushed her spirit. The laughter of cruel people had not defined her worth. And the cowboy who had asked her to dance had held her steady through every challenge, every triumph, every moment of doubt and joy. As the years advanced, Clara and James grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched Thomas marry a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property and start his own spread on land they helped him purchase. They saw Sarah fulfill her dream of becoming a teacher, educating children in Silver Creek's growing school system. And they guided young Daniel as he decided to study veterinary medicine, wanting to care for the animals that had always been such an important part of his family's life. Clara and James eventually passed the day-to-day management of the ranch to Thomas, though they remained active in advisory roles well into their 60s. They spent their later years surrounded by grandchildren, passing on stories of the old days and the lessons they had learned through hard work and steadfast love. On quiet evenings, they would still sit together on that porch James had built so long ago, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. And sometimes when the weather was fine and his old bones were not aching too badly, James would pull Clara to her feet, and they would dance slowly to music only they could hear, moving together with the ease of two people who had spent a lifetime learning each other's rhythms. Clara never forgot the feeling of standing at the edge of that dance floor, hearing the cruel laughter, believing her life was over. But she also never forgot the feeling of James's hand extended toward her, his steady presence, his unwavering belief in her worth. He had asked her to dance, and in doing so, he had offered her a future she never thought possible. He had held her steady through storms and sunshine, through hardship and prosperity, through every moment of their shared life. And when Clara Cordell finally closed her eyes for the last time at the age of 78, surrounded by her husband, children, and grandchildren in the home they had built together, her final thought was one of profound gratitude. She had been loved well and deeply. She had lived a life of purpose and meaning. And she had learned that sometimes our greatest challenges lead us to our greatest blessings, if we are brave enough to accept the hand extended toward us in our darkest moments. James lived 3 years longer, spending his final days on that ranch they had carved out of the Montana wilderness together, surrounded by the legacy they had created. And when the townspeople of Silver Creek gathered for his funeral, they told the story that had become legend in those parts about the cowboy who had asked a limping girl to dance at a harvest celebration long ago, and how that single act of kindness had blossomed into one of the great love stories of the territory. It was a reminder that love recognizes worth where others see only limitation, and that sometimes the greatest courage is simply accepting the invitation to dance, no matter how uncertain the steps might be.